singular video may single-handedly bridge the divide between Swifties and the beyhive for all time. Maybe that's wishful thinking, but it's on brand. As anyone who even casually scrolls through this channel can see, I'm a bit of a dreamer. Okay, y'all. Hello and welcome. We have a lot to get into today. This episode, I'm so excited for this episode. I did a mini TikTok episode. You don't call TikTok videos episodes. I did a short form video on TikTok about this topic, and I just knew I had to expand on it for my YouTube. So that's what we're doing today. I have my laptop behind me, so I'm expanding it right now so that I have all of my notes. So what this video is a deep dive into the differences between Black and white femininity, as well as Black and white womanhood, our respective relationships with the constructs of both femininity and patriarchy. I'm going to be using Taylor Swift and Beyoncé as examples for both ends of the spectrum. The reason I'm using these two women as an example is because whether we acknowledge it or not, consciously or subconsciously, most of us feel the way that we do about these women, how we feel about most women of their race or respective races. Obviously, neither Taylor Swift or Beyoncé can represent all women of their racial demographic, nor the experiences of every white or Black woman, but they do symbolize certain societal narratives about race and femininity. Now, I have to give a little bit of a personal disclaimer. How do I even say this? In the past, I've straight up been a Taylor Swift hater. Now, I'm still not a fan, and I probably won't ever be. She has a few songs that I do like. But I've come to a point in my journey where I now am able to look outside of myself and understand why her fans are so passionate about her. And what recently made it really click for me was this one LinkedIn post that I scrolled past a couple of days ago after the Super Bowl. I'm going to insert it just so that we all know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to read it, so maybe you want to pause to read it yourself, or maybe you want to take some screenshots. I think I'm also going to link the author of this post in the description since I can't tag them on YouTube. The reason why is because Taylor Swift to the Swifties, who are mostly white women, represents their experience of womanhood. She represents to them a woman who, against all odds, has broken so many glass ceilings and continues to be a trailblazer for their community. But surprisingly or unsurprisingly enough, Taylor Swift has never represented that to me. And she probably hasn't to many other Black women as well. Because although I am also a woman, my experience as a Black person has been far more challenging objectively than my experience as a woman ever has been or I can ever expect it to be. So now I'm going to shift the conversation from one surrounding pop stars, although we'll get back to them later, to one that is more from a historical and personal perspective. A key theme to understand in this video is the idea that the world perceives Black women as Black first and women second. That is if they acknowledge our femininity at all. Don't believe me? Let's just take a second to observe how all too common it is to accuse famous Black women, especially if those Black women are dark-skinned or tall, God forbid, of having a dick, being a man, or being transgender. The transphobia goes crazy, but that's another conversation for another day. Examples I'd like to use in this case are going to be Michelle Obama, Megan Thee Stallion, and Serena Williams. Now, I'm not even going to get into the details of how dirty people do these women and like the disgusting things that they say about them, masculinizing them, but I am going to include some screenshots just so that you guys know that I'm not making this shit up. The truly crazy part about all this is that this is a phenomenon that has been going on since the days of Sojourner Truth. And if you don't know who Sojourner Truth is, then I truly apologize that the American education system has failed you to this extent. But I'm here to educate you nonetheless. Sojourner Truth was born enslaved some point between 1797 and 1800. She was enslaved in the state of New York, and New York, being one of the more progressive states, outlawed slavery before it was ultimately outlawed after the Civil War. And so at the time, Sojourner's slave master had promised her her freedom within the time span of a year between this legislation being passed. He ended up breaking that promise, and so Sojourner ran from him. She escaped in 1826, and then she went on to become a leading civil rights activist as well as abolitionist. There's even a famous photograph of her with Abraham Lincoln. Pretty fucking awesome. The reason why I bring her up is because Sojourner Truth was a tall, dark-skinned black woman who had some muscle on her from all of the strenuous manual labor she was expected to do while enslaved. As she gained more notoriety and more fame throughout the country for speaking out about civil rights and abolition, she faced rumors very similar to the ones that these famous black women nowadays face. People began to speculate that she was actually a man in disguise because she had these manly features, she had muscles, she was tall, she was dark, she was outspoken. In fact, it got so bad that at one point she was giving a speech in Michigan in the year 1856, and a white man in the audience quite literally got up and asked her to prove that she was a woman. He wanted her to do this by revealing her breast to a small group of women in the crowd, and Sojourner did him one better. She whipped it out in front of the whole crowd. Like, any more questions? That is to say, we have been having this exact same damn conversation since fucking 1856. Do you see why I'm tired of it? Do you see why other black women are tired of it? Do you see why we need to move on? In Sojourner's most famous speech, she discusses this exact topic that is still relevant today, saying, "That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman?" Masculinizing black women is just racism 101. And honestly, if the racists want to keep it going like it's the 1800s, I think that we need to at least get a little bit more creative with it. You know, like, okay, if we're going to be racist, like, we at least need to move on to racism 102. Now let's discuss why this happens. Let's talk femininity in white/Western culture. I would just like to clarify, in case there are a lot of people who watch this video who don't use common sense or like who struggle to grasp nuance, that when I say whiteness, I will be referring to the construct of white supremacy. Sometimes I'll be referring to patriarchy. I'm just referring to traditional Western values. So I am essentially referring to conservatism. And the conservatism that I'm referring to is a very rigid form of conservatism. Like, I know not every single modern conservative feels this way, but ultimately the belief systems that conservatives operate from stem from these old white Western ideals. So, the concept of femininity that our society knows today is a Western concept. By that, I specifically mean that women of other cultures pre-colonization may have been socialized and expected to act in ways that differ from those ways that women in white and Western societies were socialized and expected to act pre-colonization. Traits understood to be feminine by Western standards include sweetness, sensitivity, passivity, humility, and being nurturing. Those are just a few. And here's some very important context to consider. Femininity is the number one trait that the vast majority of straight white men will be attracted to. The more stereotypically feminine a woman is, the more likely it is that a straight white man will find her desirable. So this understanding of femininity and all of the traits that are associated with it aren't by default a bad thing. They're not inherently a negative thing. But expecting and demanding women to act in these ways does ultimately infantilize women. Women are expected to be fragile, docile, and innocent, especially sexually. Women are expected to only be sexual in the context of creating children or pleasing a man, because desiring sex yourself that's masculine. This is probably a large part of why so many conservatives are anti-choice. This is also a large part of why white women are expected to stay forever young, shave every inch of hair on their bodies, stay thin at all cost, and remain subservient to their husbands. Now, these standards do also apply to women of color, but I would argue that it's at a less extreme standard, because at the end of the day, these standards were set by white people, so they're enforced by white people. So if you are white and you're a white woman, you have people in your immediate family that are pressuring you to uphold these standards, because upholding these standards upholds the construct of white supremacy. Whether or not they realize that's exactly what they're doing, that's what they're doing when they demand that you adhere to these guidelines. The sun is going down as I'm filming this. I'm like, oh my god, I should have started filming earlier. So that's why it looks like that, but I still think I probably look a little bit good. A little bit good. Girl, you look amazing. LOL. I swear it got even darker. Okay, I think that's better. No, where was I? Women under patriarchy are expected to be childlike. Side note, I also think that this is a big part of why men think that bimbos are hot, because children don't really be knowing shit. You see the correlation? That's not a reach. I really do think that's part of the reason. This could also start a whole nother deep dive conversation about how the infantilization of women encourages almost and normalizes PDFphilia. Why do you think it's normal for so many men to go after women who are decades younger than them, but when women do the same thing, it's considered weird? It's considered normal for men to do this up until the point that the women are just barely legal. And we all just accept this and act like, oh, well, yeah, like women are just more attractive when they're 18. Yeah, there are some biological reasons proposed for why men are attracted to younger women. And while I do think that some of these theories do have some validity, I still think that you can't really deny in good faith that men are socialized to be attracted to younger women, and even to extremely young girls. Speaking from my own personal experience, I would say that although Black women are also held up to these white beauty standards because in the society that we live in, white culture is king, I've observed that the pressures for us to actively meet these standards is far less extreme for these various reasons. So the white beauty standard obviously revolves around whiteness, and Black women, no matter how hard we try or no matter how well we assimilate, at the end of the day, we're never going to fit the look. Our hair will always remain kinky, our skin will always remain dark, and lots of Black women are just naturally curvy. Furthermore, the Black beauty standard literally encourages being curvy. I mean, literally just look at Ice Spice, who is getting hated on, dogged on all day, left and right, just because she lost some weight. It's not white people who are hating on her for losing weight, it's Black folks. Another reason that I think is behind this is the fact that we don't have white people in our immediate family that are pressuring us to fit a white beauty standard. I can speak for myself, having grown up in the suburbs, that it definitely is a hard experience growing up and actively noticing, seeing right before your eyes day to day that you are not the beauty standard. And most suburban Black girls probably do feel some way about that whenever we're super young. Being a suburban Black girl, the pressure to live up to a white beauty standard for the most part is all in your own head. Like, you're getting external messages from the world around you that that's how you're supposed to look. But when you go home, at least you don't have a mother that is telling you that you need to keep straightening your hair, that you need to lose 10 pounds so that you look just as skinny as all the other white girls in your class. And even if you do, that is still ultimately to live up to a Black beauty standard that has been heavily impacted by the white beauty standard. But it's not the white beauty standard, because I'm never going to wake up with blonde hair and blue eyes. Like, it's just not going to happen. So we can try our best to assimilate, but you'll never be white. With white women, on the other hand, I've noticed this pattern in both white women that I know personally and have been friends with, as well as white women that I see online, on social media, and in reality television shows. This seems to be the case for them, that the greatest enforcer of femininity and the gender binary in their own life has been their mother. For example, the first thing that comes to mind when I say this is last season on Love is Blind, Hannah's mom literally locked the cabinet when she was in like middle school so that she wouldn't be able to snack because her mom thought she was getting too thick. I know way too many white girls whose mom literally put them on Weight Watchers in elementary school. I'm talking like 3rd grade. These girls' moms put them on Weight Watchers. Even still, I did not realize up until I went to college and like halfway through college how extreme the pressure and the desire amongst white women is to be skinny. Like, it's serious. To the extent where many white women have EDs and they can cite their mother as the primary source for where it all started. Another example of white women being taught to uphold the gender binary is my first experience finding out that women are expected to shave their armpits was in about 4th grade when my 2 white friends were telling me this, and the way that they described it, you could tell that they had been taught that a woman not shaving her armpits not only made her undesirable, but that it was also embarrassing and slovenly. And I just remember at the time, I felt so embarrassed that I didn't know. I was like, why didn't anybody tell me that this was such a horrible rule to break? But now looking back on that as an adult, I'm like, oh, whoa, like, how young were you when your mother let you know that you should be ashamed to that extent of your body hair? Another regard in which I see this play out is just generally the fact that white women tend to get married a lot younger than most black women do. And this seems to kind of just be a cultural thing I've observed, where white families kind of raise their daughters to, and expect their daughters to, center men, specifically white men, in their lives. The ways in which they're taught to do this include adhering to the gender binary's rules of femininity, not being too loud or outspoken, and making sure they find a husband before they're old, haggardly, and shriveled up at the miserable age of 30. It just seems to me like white women may be socialized to get married to men regardless of whether or not that man is really anything special. And this isn't to say that black women don't have our own version of this. It's just not centered around marriage. Black women are still taught to be desirable at all cost, but we're taught to be desirable primarily to black men. And our own version of this is one where black women are socialized to believe it's okay to be somebody's baby mama. And this isn't to say that I'm making a judgment on anybody who is a baby mama or anybody who has a baby mama. I'm just saying that in our culture, I definitely think that there is a socialization where we teach black girls to be so concerned with being desirable to black men that they take desirability as meaning he finds me sexually attractive. And so they fulfill that need. And then that leads to pregnancy where the man doesn't want to commit, or the man can't commit because there are other systematic racial issues at hand. And then we end up with baby mamas over and over and over again. But that's another conversation for a whole nother day, for a whole nother video. Going back to the conversation about white women centering men, I think that this actually does tie back into Taylor Swift very briefly, that a big part of the reason why I feel like I probably wasn't able to relate to her very much too is because so much of her music does revolve around her relationships with men. She is successful because of the way that she leverages her relationships with men. Not to say that that's inherently a bad thing, but I really do think that that just goes to show that white women are socialized to center men in their lives and in here. In order to make all those songs about men, you got to be thinking about men a lot, baby girl. And just so I sound a little bit less like a hater so that you can see that there is less bias in this, I am a Sabrina Carpenter fan, I would say, and I even noticed the same thing in her music. That I'm like, girl, like, do we think about anything else? Like, damn, like, the whole fucking album is really about boys. Like, can we talk about something else at some point? I do think that there is a through line of white women being socialized to center men. And yes, that is a through line in women of most races. But the way that white women are taught to center men is through this idea that you need to use your current youth in beauty to become a wife, otherwise you're undesirable and you're out of time. And all of that stems back to Western ideals surrounding femininity, that women are supposed to be useful to men and that women don't really exist outside of men. Women exist to serve men. That very easily evolves into the subconscious belief that if you're not serving your purpose by being desirable to men, then you're not worth anything as a woman. Which very easily turns into the idea that if you're not somebody's wife, you are not worthy. Going on from that conversation, I can generally say what I've observed about white women and their relationship to femininity is that it seems to be something that is thrust upon them at a very young age. in a way that is similar, but also quite different to what your typical woman of color is going to experience. And that being said, the way that femininity is forced upon them at such a young age, it really hinders their gender exploration and self-expression in general. There's really nothing wrong with gender exploration. We all have masculine and feminine energy within us. And if you're just forced to stay within the confines of just one of those very rigid gender binary structures, of course you're going to ultimately start to resent it, because there's no room for play, there's no room for creativity. And I believe that human beings were put on this earth to explore, to create. If you don't have any room to do that, even in something as simple as your gender, then you don't have any room to find out who you are. And then you don't have any room to share that with the world. And then you don't attract what's really meant for you. You're ultimately living a lie, because if you don't know who you are, you can't say it to the world and then see that reflected in the people who choose to love you. There's no way for you to be loved for who you truly are if you don't have the room and the opportunity to find out who you really are. So since most white women grow up in a household where femininity is forced upon them and they're put in this box from such an early age, when they finally get the opportunity to break free of it, once they go into young adulthood, if they've become a feminist, the odds are that they're going to start to resent that traditional femininity. And this isn't to say that all white women who are feminist have this experience. Definitely not the case. But I do think it's where we have the great divide of feminists who resent all of these traits that are associated with being feminine, i.e., being sweet, being sensitive, being passive, humility, being nurturing, all of those stereotypical things, versus other women who are feminist and do believe in these ideals and do think that they should just be more revered and not forced upon people. It should be something that anybody who wants to express and explore their femininity can gravitate to and choose to indulge in on their own accord. The women and the people who start to resent femininity as they grow older and become feminist begin to see femininity as something that is inherently oppressive, when really the thing that was oppressive in the first place was the patriarchy. It's not femininity. It's kind of like if somebody took a hammer and hit you over the head with it, the hammer isn't inherently bad. The person who wielded the hammer used it for evil. That is the way that patriarchy uses femininity. It uses femininity to oppress and constrain women, especially white women, but that doesn't inherently mean that femininity is a bad or oppressive thing. What patriarchy does is it instructs white women to act feminine in exchange for the opportunity to be perceived as most desirable amongst all women, in exchange for the opportunity to be loved and revered by white men, and in exchange for the opportunity to be in a better position than women of every other race. But then it literally turns right back around and uses that same femininity that it told white women to behave according to as reason for why they can't have equal rights. You can't be paid equally because you're too emotional, you're too sensitive, because you need to be taking care of the children, because you're not smart enough, because you're too weak and fragile. But it's like, isn't that what you wanted me to be? On the other hand, this is the patriarchy that Black women know. Black women are generally not perceived as feminine unless we are objectively 10 out of 10 gorgeous and frail. So in patriarchy, Black women are generally perceived as unattractive and masculine, because the standard for us to not be perceived in this light is incredibly high. Most Black women cannot reach that standard. As a result, Black women and girls are not protected by men and by society at large, because it's assumed that we don't need it or that we're not deserving of it. As a result, being perceived as feminine as a Black woman is a privilege. It challenges stereotypes about Black women and affords us a lifestyle that we otherwise would not have been privy to. It's gotten so dark. I'm so sorry, guys. I really should have filmed this earlier. but I'm almost done. How does this tie back into Beyonce and Taylor Swift? I'm going to tell you. Let's talk about Beyonce since we've already talked a little bit about Taylor. So, white people really seem to kind of back off of Beyonce, stop fucking with her as heavily after she dropped Lemonade. Lemonade was a very pro-Black album, and it was political as well. It made a lot of white people uncomfortable. SNL even spoofed this phenomenon, making a skit called The Day Beyonce Turned Black, making fun of this shift that Beyonce had with the public, especially with the white general public. I highly recommend that you go watch that. It's very relevant to this video. So what changed for Beyonce in this moment? She got more outspoken, like Sojourner Truth. And so white people stopped protecting and upholding Beyonce as an example of one of the few Black women who does fit that demure mold of white femininity. I say this being a Black woman in America. Beyonce represents to me the experience of being a Black woman in America. I know Beyonce has extreme privilege. She is literally a billionaire. She is one of the biggest figures in music of all time. And she's light-skinned, she's beautiful, all of these other things that make her privileged. It still does not negate the fact that to me, she represents the experience of being a Black woman in America at large. Because although she has broken so many records, won so many awards, and continued only to elevate and evolve her craft for decades at a time now, she is still hated and despised by white people because she dares to use her privilege to be outspoken about racism. Because although Beyonce is a beautiful, rich, light-skinned, talented musical icon, at the end of the day, she is still a Black woman and she will be treated as such. White America hates Beyonce nowadays because white America is angry that she is no longer their token pretty Black girl. On the other hand, Taylor Swift is not someone that I have been able to relate to because our experiences in womanhood are so vastly different because we are different races. We have and always will have totally different experiences of womanhood because she is white and I am not. There is very little common ground in the experience between being a woman when you're white versus being a woman when you're Black. I've personally never been surprised at all of the things that Taylor Swift has been able to accomplish in her career because when I looked at it, I was like, well, obviously you're white. Regardless of whether or not I think that she is the greatest singer, performer, artist, or even songwriter, she's been able to accomplish all that she has in her career because she has a winner's mindset and a winner's work ethic. And that's not something that we should easily scoff at. If I was white and the worst of my experiences with patriarchy was misogyny rather than misogynoir, I'm sure I would also feel inspired by Taylor Swift and all that she's been able to accomplish in her career. I wasn't ever putting myself in the shoes of her white fans before, and that's why I wasn't able to understand her appeal. I think that lots of people, lots of Swifties in particular, have the same issue with Beyonce. Because it's so painstakingly obvious to me now that Beyonce means the same thing to me that Taylor Swift means to white women. I think a lot of people in the Beehive end up resenting Taylor Swift because we see at face value that Beyonce has obviously put in more work into refining her performance skills in particular. And so we see how hard Beyonce has had to work to achieve the level of success that she has. And so we end up making the conclusion that Taylor Swift must only be able to be a similar level as successful because she's white. While I do think that her white privilege is contributing to the success that she experiences, I definitely don't think that it's fair for us to act like that is the only reason. At the end of the day, it isn't Taylor Swift's fault that she has white privilege. Like, what is she supposed to do? She's supposed to turn down the awards. Like, it can be annoying watching from the perspective of a Black person, but honestly, like, if I was Taylor Swift and I had white privilege, I'd be like, well, fuck, like, I'm taking the VMA too. Like, they gave it to me. Like, what else am I supposed to do, you know? We have to learn not to hate the player, but to hate the game. Taylor Swift being the player and the patriarchy / white supremacy being the game. Although you would hope that white women would be able to put themselves into the shoes of Black women and see where we're coming from and understand why so many of us look up to Beyonce, It's also safe to assume that the vast majority of them haven't attempted to. And so they feel personally attacked when they see that Taylor Swift is getting dogged on, because it just feels like their experience with misogyny is being overlooked. They don't see the majority of the race issues at hand, because to them, the only issues that they see right before their eyes are those that are presented to them by the misogyny that they have to face day in and day out. In conclusion, I'm not here to bitch about whether it's harder to be a white woman or to be a Black woman. I think we all have to take responsibility for our own lives and make the best out of the cards that we have been dealt, all while still figuring out how to fight against and break down the harmful systems that are hurting us and other people in our society, oppressing them because of factors that they genuinely can't control. What I'm trying to get at in this video is that Taylor Swift and Beyonce are two sides of the same coin in pop culture. Just like white women and Black women are both facing two sides of the same coin, which we know as this oppressive structure called patriarchy. No matter which side of the spectrum you're on, we need more nuance and empathy in discussing these things. That way we're brought closer together rather than driven further apart. Because driving us apart and causing inner fighting, that's what the oppressor wants. All right, thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe. Comment down below your thoughts. I do respond. If you thought that this video was interesting, please share it. I would love that. Check out all of the links in the description, and I will see you guys next week. Thank you again for watching.